165 years ago, on this day, the American Civil War started. Yes, the very long 4-year bloody conflict, which we call the American Civil War, the first one, not the second one, started 5 years before the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which I actually did a community post on. I post on the channel because I do that, if you didn't know, about certain history anniversaries, not just videos. I also do some posts sometimes. Anyways, you should check that out. You should, now you know. But anyways, yes, it's the 165th anniversary of 65th anniversary of the American Civil War. At 4:30 a.m. it started when a mortar round from Fort Johnson surrounding Fort Sumter was fired, and well, it didn't mean to hit the fort, but it exploded over the Fort Sumter, which signaled for other Confederate batteries and cannon positions to open fire on the fort that was surrounding Fort Sumter in the Charleston Harbor in South Carolina. Now, South Carolina was actually the first state to secede, so that's kind of fitting. I don't know. They seceded in December, and once they did that, and when and other states seceded from the United States, they started seizing federal property that was inside their state. Something like Fort Sumter, because the federal government owned that, because the federal military, really, the Union military. Because then in February the Confederacy formed, and so did its army. And so once states started seceding, and they started seizing that government property so it could be theirs, right? And Fort Sumter was one of those things. It was basically a fort built on an island, and it took up most of the island, so from certain angles, it looks just like a fort in the middle of the water. Just looks like it's just built in the water. In Charleston Harbor, which was the harbor to Charleston, the city, and it was right in the middle of that bottleneck point. And there also, the Confederates had forts and battery positions, cannons, are almost nearly surrounding the entire fort, telling them to surrender, give it up. And the Major Anderson, the one that was commanding the 85 troops inside the Union Fort Sumter, was like, no. So the mortar round fired, and they started blasting at Fort Sumter at 4:30 a.m. But the troops inside Fort Sumter were really undersupplied on everything like food and ammunition. They were also outgunned and definitely outmanned. They had 85 troops. The Confederates had hundreds and hundreds of them, surrounding them. But it wasn't until 7 a.m. that same day, April 12th, when the Union started firing back at the Confederates. The Union troops started, because they were heavily outgunned and heavily outmanned.
Uh-oh, looks like I forgot to mention the partial skit part. I guess I'm gonna include it right now.
Yo, Yanks! Just surrender and give up the fort already! No! Alright then. You may fire when ready. You know what? We'll give you one more chance to surrender. What? Your mother.
Fire!
Wait. No, wait! Sometime later in the day, the Confederates from Fort Johnson started firing. No, not Fort Johnson, some other fort. But Fort Johnson was the one they fired the mortar round from to signal to attack. But later in the day, they started firing hot shots, which were just heated cannonballs, inside Fort Sumter, which hit the wooden barracks and the officer buildings, and started setting things on fire inside the buildings on fire inside the fort. So the Union had that going for them. Not really. Against them, more like. So, and then actually I'm going to talk about a little bit about the next day. The next day, one of the Confederate cannonballs hit the flagpole inside that was holding up the American flag of the Union inside Fort Sumter, which knocked it over. But the flagpole was quickly repaired and raised back up with the flag on it. So that was good. That was in like the afternoon, right? Like the beginning of the afternoon, 1 p.m. All right, but after 34 hours of bombardment, at 2:30 p.m., Major Anderson finally agreed to surrender the fort and evacuate his forces because, frankly, they weren't going to make it. And also, he held out, in his mind, he held out honorably, and they're not surrendering themselves, but just the fort, and they held for as long as they could. They didn't back down, like they didn't fold under zero pressure or something. So, in his mind, he won psychologically, Also, the troops, it was undersupplied. Like everyone, no food, running out of ammunition, and the fort was being absolutely destroyed by the 3,300 cannonballs, Confederate cannonballs that were destroying it. And so, frankly, it was going to collapse at any moment, really. So he surrendered the fort. There were actually no casualties, no deaths, no injuries during the entire thing, not on both sides. So, wow, that's impressive, really. And on the next day, on April 14th, there was the surrendering ceremony. They were doing like 100 cannon salute. The Americans, the Union, the Federals, for like the surrender to the flag, right? But one of the cannonballs exploded prematurely and instantly killed one soldier, mortally wounded another when he died, and then he died to his wounds later, and injured 4 others. So that was an indirect casualties, but not really direct. So there's that. And so afterwards, after the whole bombardment and the surrender of the fort, U.S. President Abraham Lincoln ordered for 75,000 volunteers to be raised to suppress the rebellion that started from Fort Sumter. But a few other southern states that haven't seceded yet from the Union didn't like that, and they seceded. 4 of them seceded from the Union and joined the Confederacy in the following order, which is Virginia, Arkansas, North Carolina, and Tennessee, specifically in that order. And they seceded and joined the Confederacy. So now we have more states to deal with. Thank you, Abraham Lincoln. You did your best, though. So, nah. And so began the American Civil War, a conflict that people thought would only take a few weeks or months, whenever a major engagement happened or a show of force to end the conflict. If only it were that easy. Instead, it lasted 4 brutal years because people also thought it would be a glorious adventure, just like the American Revolution, which the American Revolution was not in itself. It's just people thought it was. And it was actually pretty bloody. But this war would be even more bloody with the invention of the mini ball, like a little over a decade before. So, beginning of the American Civil War.
Not.
This day in history. 1861, 165 years ago. Bye-bye.